So the usual thing of I hope everybody can see the screen in front of them. And today we are going to go through a session on the menopause and work. So just in terms of the sort of agenda for today, so we're going to talk about the sort of a little bit of awareness about the menopause, including the Davina effect, so sort of referring to Davina McCall, talk about perimenopause, a little bit about just symptoms and myths, and then we'll think about in the sort of the lens of the workforce and in the workplace, what are the legal considerations that you need to be aware of? And also thinking about supporting employees, which could be potentially including things like having conversations with staff, menopause policy, other helpful tools. And as I say, there is some signposting that I'll do throughout the session. So you'll get a copy of the slides afterwards that just includes the links to those pieces of information or documents that might be helpful as well. So just in terms of going through the session, why are we sort of talking about menopause now? Well, we're talking about it for a couple of different things. One is I think it's important, and I think perhaps a little bit like mental health, it's become a topic that actually, looking back on it now, we now realise is incredibly important and something that we should be talking about. 52% of the population as sort of female or potentially non-binary people will go through the menopause. And menopausal women are the fastest growing sort of demographic in the workplace. And 1 in 10 women have going through the menopause have left a job because of their symptoms. Some interesting research that I saw recently was from a wellbeing platform called Peppy. They'd done a survey around menopause and work. They'd found that of the employees experiencing menopause symptoms, 80% had sleep problems, 78% had experienced brain fog, 77% had difficulty remembering things, 73% had anxiety, and 67% had difficulty focusing. So you can see the high level of sort of symptoms that people are experiencing. And those types of symptoms, things such as brain fog, anxiety, difficulty focusing or remembering things, could well be things that could impact somebody in the workplace. So I think it's something that, similar to sort of mental health, we're realising the importance of raising awareness of this and thinking about how we support people. But then we've also got, I think, some of the understanding and awareness of menopause has possibly increased following Davina McCall's documentaries on Channel 4, and certainly since they've taken place. I'm sure you may feel this as well, but I think there's been a lot more conversation in the media and on TV. There's been a lot more information that I think is becoming available, and not quite sure whether this is such a good thing, but I think it's being used as a bit of a sort of a marketing ploy for some things now. But we've certainly seen an increase in terms of demand for things such as hormone replacement therapy, HRT, which has been great to see that more people are using things such as HRT. But if anybody has personal experience like I have of being on HRT, then you might understand the frustrations of the last few months of trying to get hold of your prescription. So but I think we're certainly seeing an increase in terms of people realising the impact that menopause can have on people at work. And we're seeing a lot more people understanding about menopause and that awareness being raised through people such as Davina McCall. But a very recent, in fact, I think it was last month, a survey by ACAS was to organisations in the UK and asking how well equipped they as an employer felt in supporting their workforce if they were going through the menopause. And the poll found that only a third, 33% of respondents felt felt equipped. So a large proportion of the population of employers saying that they don't feel very well equipped to support employees going through the menopause. So obviously that's one of the reasons why we wanted to run the session today. So just a little bit of background, talking about what do we mean by the menopause. And actually there's two key states, or three, that you might find if you include sort of post-menopause. But there is menopause itself is typically when somebody's not had a period for 12 months. At that point they are deemed to be menopausal, they are in menopause, and the average age of menopause is 51. But there's a period of time known as perimenopause, and perimenopause actually means around menopause, which is where symptoms start to develop. It's more of a transitional time, and it's on the lead up to that period of menopause. Now, it varies between women, but they say on average, perimenopause can last about 4 years. So if average age of menopause is 51, we think about 4 years as an average of perimenopause, then obviously, people could be experiencing perimenopausal symptoms around the age of 47, or potentially much earlier if they have a perimenopausal period that lasts for longer than 4 years. And I think it's really great that through this awareness that people like Davina McCall, these campaigns that they've had, that we're starting to get to understand actually what do we mean by menopause and what is perimenopause. My own personal experience, I'd never heard the term perimenopausal. And when I looked back at the point that I started taking HRT, when I look back, I realised that there was possibly around an 8-year period where I'd been experiencing some perimenopausal symptoms and had absolutely no idea that there was such a thing as perimenopause, or that actually these symptoms could all be related, or that there was support that was available. So I think it's fantastic that this awareness is hopefully meaning that for anybody coming in sort of almost behind me now, there is that understanding of actually there's a period before menopause, this perimenopause period, during which many of these sort of symptoms can be experienced. So symptoms, I mean, there's such a wide range of physical and psychological symptoms people can experience through menopause. This slide just pinpoints a number of them. There are huge other ones. And I think it's really important to say that the majority of women going through sort of perimenopause or menopause will experience symptoms, but each person is different. And symptoms can really fluctuate and they can vary, between each person. So not one person is going to have every single, symptom, and people will vary in terms of the severity of their symptoms and the impact that those symptoms then go on to have on their well-being. But as I say, some of the more familiar symptoms that we might be aware of include things such as, psychological issues, anxiety, memory loss, the sort of brain fog, weight gain, headaches, and it's literally like a tick chart where, from my own personal experience, I can kind of go through each one of those and go, yes, yes, yes. So, but as I say, what's really important is to understand that it's a really wide range of symptoms and that every person is going to experience those slightly differently. So it's quite a complex sort of thing when we're looking at, I guess, symptoms. And I think from the point of view of sort of addressing symptoms and identifying what those symptoms could be a cause of. There are also some myths, and some of this I think has just been down to this lack of understanding and awareness that people have had, perhaps before their own experience of the menopause. So obviously it's a myth that it starts when your periods stop, because we know that there is this this perimenopause, this transitional period. It's not the same for everybody. You know, quite often people think that they have multiple symptoms and they can't identify a specific major issue or concern, so they feel that it's not bad enough for them to go and see a doctor or seek support. A typical myth that it can be diagnosed by a blood test and hormone levels, where your hormone levels vary, you know, hour to hour, day to day. So particularly if you're over the age of 45, then it's not something that's diagnosed through a blood test. It should be through those symptoms that you might be experiencing. And obviously, there's been a lot of talk over the years in regard to HRT and the risks of HRT. Now, obviously, you know, medical practitioners will take any individual through any concerns or risks that there may be, but it's not a generic sort of risk that HRT is dangerous. And it's really just highlighting how important information and awareness is for people to understand not only what some of the symptoms are and the impacts of those, but also some of the myths that have built up that technically aren't actually true. So starting to think about this within the workplace, and as you say, you know, if we think about our workplaces within the sector, you know, 52% of the population or plus could be experiencing or will at some stage in their life experience menopause and perimenopause. And within the social sector, we probably have quite a high sort of female workforce, particularly in many subsectors of the social sector. So if we think about the timescales, people in their 40s, we might have a large number of employees or members of our workforce who are going through the menopause. And if we think about some of those symptoms, you know, brain fog, hot flushes, etc., they could be having a real impact on our workforce at any one sort of given time. So thinking about the workplace, and the first point to start about is thinking about employment law, and just if there is any law around this and what that is and what that means to employers within the social sector. So menopause at work is typically covered by different pieces of legislation to certain degrees. Now, with regards to the Equality Act, we know that there are obviously different protected characteristics that are protected by the Equality Act, including things such as age, sex, sexual orientation, marital status, and disability. So there could potentially be coverage for menopause under three of the protected characteristics, so around age, potential age discrimination, sex discrimination, and disability discrimination. Now, menopause itself is not classed as a disability. However, again, if we think about some of the symptoms, you know, a disability in employment law is typically something that has an impact on an individual's day-to-day activities and is something that lasts longer term. And longer term is typically meant to, or is typically viewed by employment tribunals as being sort of 12 months or plus onwards. So there could well be things such as, you know, anxiety, depression, and other symptoms that occur through menopause that may well, in effect, be covered through that disability discrimination legislation because of the impact that they have and the fact that they are a longer term issue that somebody is dealing with. So there is the potential that there could be some protection under the Equality Act itself. The Health and Safety at Work Act is really about making sure that employers provide a healthy and a safe working environment for their workers, their employees and workers. And that could potentially extend to the working conditions when somebody's experiencing menopausal symptoms. So we'll go through shortly some of the things that you could look at in terms of supporting employees, but that could mean some sort of changes or considerations of the physical working environment. So, for example, perhaps allowing somebody to have a desk near a window that they can open, or to have access to a fan should they be having, or experiencing sort of hot flushes. And then finally, obviously, we have law within the employment law around flexible working and the right to request flexible working. And ACAS has just introduced some new codes of practice around flexible working. And I mention flexible working because it may well be that actually to support themselves through a period of perimenopause or menopause, it may be that employees want to consider some form of flexible working request to support them through that time. So flexible working is something to be mindful of. And as I say, ACAS have just introduced some new codes of practice around flexible working. But in terms of things that you can do within the workplace itself, I think there are three main things to think about. I think general awareness and awareness sessions for people, such as we're doing today, or it could be just raising awareness through provision of, posters if you've got a physical working environment, and people just talking perhaps about their own experiences, just to sort of start to increase and raise some awareness of perimenopause, menopause, and the impacts that it can potentially have. And some of that awareness could potentially be done through signposting as well. And I think signposting can be really helpful, not only to raise awareness, but also if employees happen to be experiencing potential symptoms, or they want to explore and increase their knowledge in a particular area, then signposting to support can be really helpful. And I'll go through some suggestions in terms of signposting shortly. If you have something such as an employee assistance program, that can include things that could be helpful to employees who may be experiencing symptoms, which could include things like potential access to counselling, access to sort of guidance in regards to mental health or physical health and well-being, and sometimes even access to virtual GPs. So again, making sure that there's an awareness amongst the workforce, not just for the purposes of menopause, but that they have the support available to them through an employee assistance program. So making sure your workforce are aware that that is available to them. And I think for managers, really important to perhaps have some education, and to also give some support through perhaps the creation of a policy that can give them guidance in terms of what to do in particular situations, but also make sure that they understand what their obligations are, or what they can do in regards to health and safety, and undertaking potential risk assessments, or providing practical support, such as fans. Keep referring to fans. So there are various things that you can do, and I'm just going to go into drill down a bit deeper into some of those, and as I say, highlight some tools and resources for you as well. So I think in terms of signposting, there are some guidance that's available for individuals. So again, if you use things such as Teams, or you've got an intranet, or you've even got a notice board, you could potentially, have some details of signposting for individuals if they want to seek out further information for themselves. So the NHS has guidance. There are also organisations such as the British Menopause Society, organisations like Menopause Matters and the Menopause Charity. They've all kind of got good information for individuals. There's also support and signposting that is helpful, not just for individuals, but actually for employers and managers too. So there's Henpicked, which is specifically about menopause in the workplace. And Balance is a website, and there's also an app, so a mobile app, which again includes all of the information that would be helpful for an individual to find out themselves, but also has really useful information for employers as well. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the employer support that you can get through Balance in a short while. But certainly from my personal experience, Balance has been really helpful. That's a lady by the name of, I think it's Dr. Louise Newson, and she was one of the people that I sort of got a lot of information from her website myself, as my friend and I were starting to explore and found out about this concept of perimenopause, and we came across Dr. Louise Newson, and she's got some really good information, and since then she's created this Balance app and the website, and as I say, it's really helpful, I think, for not just individuals but also for employers. And ACAS has also got some support as well, so again, from an employment perspective, that's really helpful to look at that. And some of those pieces of guidance, things such as ACAS, might be helpful just in terms of the sort of education or understanding for managers within the workplace. In terms of managers, as I say, I think really helpful to think of, education and training. If we think about line managers, they're usually the first port of call or point of contact for somebody if they are suffering, if they've got issues with health concerns. Line managers are the individuals who will typically implement the organisation's policies. They're typically the people who will undertake risk assessments with an employee, and they're typically responsible for sort of managing ill health, absences, return to work, etc. So they're really fundamental to supporting employees. So I think it's really important that they've got some understanding and awareness of what perimenopause and menopause are. If you introduce menopause policies, that they understand what those policies are, and also that they understand the support available for somebody in perimenopause or menopause, either through your organisation or via signposting to external support. And I think as well, it'd be really helpful if managers feel able to have conversations with staff about the menopause. And I appreciate that may always be a difficult thing to have, but I think that if you have line managers where they are building relationships with their whole team, not just talking about employees who may be of an age to be considered potentially perimenopausal or menopausal, but if they're building relationships based on sort of trust and respect with their team, if they have regular one-to-ones with their team that might include sort of a general check-in, how are you feeling, how are you doing, that's sort of more about them and their physical or mental well-being. And if you just ask people on a regular basis, how are you doing? That type of approach can help to, I think, facilitate a relationship where an employee may feel more able to open up to their manager if they felt that they were experiencing symptoms and they wanted to look at support that they might need. So I think that creating that kind of environment as line managers where we're having well-being conversations with people makes it easier for an employee to approach their line manager if they're concerned about the symptoms that they're experiencing. And I think understanding as well then, to say what is available to the employee through policies or support that the organisation has is really helpful. But I think it's really important, and I'm hopeful that managers would do this, that obviously it's really up to the employee how much information they want to disclose if they're talking to you, and absolutely not to suggest that somebody may be in perimenopause or going through menopause, or make assumptions about any sort of symptoms and adjustments or anything that they may want. So I think it's really about letting the employee drive that conversation and what they feel comfortable talking about, because obviously employees may not feel comfortable talking about this. But actually, if we have a culture where there is greater awareness of menopause, perimenopause, and the symptoms associated with those, and where we have regular well-being conversations with our managers, that culture then might create a scenario where somebody's much more open to opening up to their manager about how they're experiencing or what they're experiencing. And it may well be then that there are potential changes that could be considered for individuals. These could be informal or they could be formal arrangements through a sort of flexible working request. But, it could be perhaps flexibility about start and finish times, or taking breaks if they're needed, working from home if that were practical, changes in duties in their role, or something simple to letting somebody have control over their working environment, sitting by a window that opens so we can get some relief if we're having a hot flush. So there are certain changes that an employer could look to make if somebody was going through the menopause. And obviously, if the effects of the symptoms cause the employer to believe that the individual may have a disability, that protection under the Equality Act, then it may well be that the employer will need to consider reasonable adjustments for that individual. But obviously, for the employee themselves, if they're experiencing symptoms and they think a longer term change to their job role or environment may be helpful, then they can consider, a flexible working request in line with any policies, or in line with the ACAS Code of Practice if you don't have a sort of specific policy in regard to menopause or flexible working. Sorry, brain fog. So in terms of policy, I do think that a menopause policy could be helpful for organisations. I think for a number of reasons. It can obviously help as part of that awareness or education for managers and for other staff, if it includes some information about the menopause. It can guide employees and line managers in terms of what support might be available to them. And it could potentially help facilitate any conversations that an employee may want to have with their manager or anybody else in the organisation. So a menopause policy might be helpful for you. And obviously, as a social enterprise, we're always looking for ways that we can support our sector colleagues with information in as cost-effective and helpful way as possible. And Balance, which is the app and the website that I talked about previously, have actually produced a menopause policy template that you could download. The link's in the slide here, so obviously I'll share the slides with you after the session today, so that you could access a template menopause policy that you could then tweak and obviously implement into your organisation. So if you did want to consider having a menopause policy, of course, Roots, we'd be happy to talk to you about that as well. But there is the potential to get access to a free policy template that you could implement in your organisation through Balance. I'm just going to finish off by saying that there are lots of free resources that are available from Roots HR just in regards to HR within the social sector. So a range of free HR toolkits, fact sheets, and you can access up to free 1 hour of consultancy as well. So obviously, we'll share all this information after the session today, but if you have any specific questions and you've not yet used our 1 hour of consultancy, then obviously we'd be happy to sort of talk to you in more detail about the sort of free 1 hour of consultancy. So that's the session, the part of the session where I'm going to talk to you about menopause and perimenopause. I'm going to stop the recording now, and then what we'll do is we'll just go through